Thanks so much, Aida. It's really good to talk. Uh,
Thanks. Pleasure to
so
be here.
the story I'm working on, which is just wrapping up now after some reporting in Kenya and in Germany, is looking at labor migration and specifically how an increasing number of African countries seem to be, sort of embracing it as a development and economic strategy, including several in East Africa. So I'd be really interested to get your thoughts on kind of the larger trend as well as, the work, the specific work that ILO is doing. Maybe we can start with just the trend kind of itself and what you're seeing. It seems based on conversations I've had that this is sort of development economic strategy that a lot of Asian countries have had for decades. But it seems only recently that, African countries are sort of explicitly embracing it and putting in place, kind of specific policies you know, um, to promote it. Can you talk about, what you're sort of seeing in the region? I think, Kenya and Ethiopia are big examples, but maybe there's some other countries you would highlight. What are you seeing, working in this space?
Okay, thanks, Aaron. It's great to talk to you as well. Well, yeah, to a certain extent, of course, the numbers continue to rise, as you know, within Africa as well as beyond. But if you see the latest estimate, actually, there was a bit of decrease on labor migration. The global estimate by the ILO it came out in December, right? Yeah, I think in December 2024, for the first time. There we see a decrease, which is of course positive as well. I'm not sure if it's positive or negative, or if it's also the methodology that was used in terms of collecting the data, but we have seen a bit of decrease. But generally in Africa, we've seen quite an increase. But as you know, majority of the migration within Africa happens within Africa. So it's intra-regional rather than inter-regional migration, at least 80%. Does the government see it as a way of curbing unemployment? Yes, we have definitely seen a trend in terms of an increase. Yes and no, actually, is my response, because sometimes I wonder if you look at it in the national development strategy of most of these countries, labor migration is not that prominent. So if they're looking at it as a strategy, I would assume they would have addressed it in the strategy as well, at least in the national development strategy. In some countries, of course, it does touch upon labor migration issues, but in most, it's a bit silent. But we've also seen a trend of majority of the countries developing a labor migration policy. Ethiopia has, for example, currently have a draft migration policy. It's still, of course, in draft form. Kenya have adapted the labor migration policy. They're working on the labor migration management bill, which is actually almost finalized this one. The same thing in Uganda, almost across the region. In one way or the other, they're developing either a comprehensive migration policy or a specific labor migration policy. Over the years, of course, then in terms of protection of migrant workers to a certain extent as well, especially through bilateral labor agreements, has increased significantly, as you've seen. I mean, countries from especially from the Eastern Africa has been negotiating bilateral agreement. Of course, the major destination for most of Eastern African migrants are the Gulf. So I have negotiated with an agreement with the Gulf. I mean, Somalia just signed, I think, last month with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Ethiopia have already signed with, I think, about 5 countries. Kenya, the same, have signed with a number of countries, Uganda. So it's a trend that has also increased in terms of protection of migrant workers through BLA. Of course, some countries have also assigned labor attached in destination country. So yeah, a lot is happening I'm just trying to give you the whole picture in terms of labor migration. Yes, one is the unemployment. It does contribute to unemployment. It has become, I think, a bit challenging to create adequate, because given the number of youth or labor market entrants every year, it has become challenging for most countries in the region to create adequate employment opportunities. for the labor market entrance in most of the countries. So of course labor migration is one way, but it's also, I think, the major contribution is also the remittancy that we cannot ignore. In some countries, it's a significant contribution to the GDP as well. So it's being seen positively. Of course, countries continue to create employment opportunities in the country of origin and to make sure that at least labor migration is a choice. But it's also, I think, beyond the government, I think the youth, I mean, the population is youthful in most of these countries between the age of 15 to 24. So they want to experience, they want to see new countries, they want to move, even when there's employment. But of course, conflict remains a challenge in the region as well. So some of the push factor remain beyond unemployment as well. And some conflict, as you've seen, there's a lot of forced displacement as well within our region in Eastern Africa. But environment also play a critical part as a push factor within the region. The climate change has affected migration movement in the region, but as well as underemployment is also another challenge beyond unemployment as well. So yes, I mean, of course, in some ways, it is a bit of a breathing space for governments as well. Of course, this labor migration. They have not, as I said, adequately addressed it in their development strategy as much as they should. But generally, yeah, they have at least developing the right policy, putting strategies in place to facilitate labor migration, which wasn't there if you look at it in the last maybe 20 years ago. The majority of this issue was not a priority for any of the countries in this region, at least. But in the last 10 to 15 years, it has become, actually, in the last 20 years, I would say, it has become a critical issue, attracting a lot of policy attention in most of the countries we cover.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Or should
No,
I say
I was just going to ask
what
about.
ILO does? Yeah?
Yeah,
Sorry?
yeah. I mean, we can turn to that in just a second. I was just going to ask about the debate about this because obviously it's been controversial. On the one hand, you have the benefits of remittances. I think there's a lot of academic research that shows benefits. At the same time, people have concerns about brain drain, so about labor conditions when people go abroad. How do you see that debate playing out? And what's your kind of best assessment of the evidence as to kind of the merits of labor migration?
In terms of brain drain, I will say for now, I don't think it is affecting the region as much, especially in our region, because if you look at it, majority of the migration has been on low-skilled migration. I mean, at least in terms of significant numbers. Of course, there's limited numbers of high-skilled migration as well, such as health workers, engineers, and others. But in terms of numbers, comparing to the low-skilled migration, it's insignificant. The majority of the countries from our region, at least, going to the Gulf is concentrated in the domestic work sector, as you know, especially the female migrant workers. The male, of course, tend to get involved in security, agriculture, and construction. But again, it's mostly low-skilled. So we have not seen the impact of brain drain in the region for now, at least. But of course, most of the countries want to move away because of the challenge that comes with low migration, especially in terms of working condition protection issues, want to move a bit away from the low-skilled migration towards semi-skilled and high-skilled. But we haven't gotten there yet. So probably if we continue, if the countries continue to promote or to try to facilitate the semi-skilled and skilled migration, in the long run, it might have effect in terms of a brain drain. But that being said as well, given the population and of course, and the age group of our population being young, I believe if the government have the right strategy in place in terms of building the right skills, for example, if there's a demand, let's say, of engineers in Germany, the Kenyan government, of course, given that they have some bilateral agreements recently as well, they can try to build the capacity of Kenyans in the sector of engineering, for example. So I think it's putting the right policy and strategy in place to make sure that we respond adequately to the demand of the country of destination. But also, I think we need to look internally as well to see what is the sectors, what's the surplus in terms of labor, in which sector do we have. So we need to do a bit, of course, a bit of assessment, both from the country of origin side, but as well as the destination side, to see in the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, what would be the demand? Because we all know that, for example, Europe is an aging population, even Middle East in terms of having, their population is quite low, as you know. And especially nowadays with women mostly entering the labor market in terms of the family size that is also small. So there will continuously, the same thing in North America, it's aging population. So there is a demand for the young population. So we just have to have the right strategy in place. We have to do our homework right to see in 50 years, what is the demand in the different countries that we plan to send labor migrants? What is the surplus in our own countries? Where do we see the gap in terms of the sectors that there's demand, but we don't have the required qualified personnel? And accordingly, develop the right educational policy, as well as the TVET strategies to make sure that we develop, it responds to the need of the labor market, both of the country of origin or country of destination, so that we're not confronted with the brain drain in the long run. But as I said, currently, I don't see the brain drain challenge in the region because majority of the migration is on the low-skilled sector. In terms of the working condition, it remains to be a challenge, but I would like to think there has been development. I mean, I've been working in this area for the last over 10 years. Initially, majority of the countries from the country of origin didn't even have a policy to respond adequately to the demand, because migration started happening in like hundreds of thousands overnight almost in some of these countries. And of course, government did not know how to respond to it as well. And of course, you see hear a lot of stories about exploitation, abuse of migrants in the destination countries. Some didn't have diplomatic mission present even in the country of destination to respond to the need of the migrants. Some didn't have labor attaches. Even now, actually, there's a limitation in terms of labor attaches, but at least countries like Kenya, Uganda have assigned, and I believe Somalia, if I'm not mistaken, Ethiopia still have assigned labor attaches. So at least there is a system in place where, I mean, it might not be adequate. There's capacity limitation that, of course, we're well aware of, but at least there's some sort of support. If you look at a country like Ethiopia, there's almost diplomatic mission in every Gulf states, almost, not all, but in almost Gulf states. So in case of challenge being faced by migrant workers, they can definitely access, at least there's a point of where they can access support. In the past, that didn't exist. So we see this improvement. Is it a perfect? No, far from it. There's still a lot to be done. But we also, of course, see the fact that, of course, there's more and more bilateral labor agreement being signed between country of origin and destination. And most of these bilateral agreement, not adequately, but to a certain extent, cover the issue of protection of migrant workers. It is also have provisions in terms of working conditions, payment of wages, sometimes recruitment fees, complaint mechanisms. Sometimes, of course, it could be improved. Definitely, the bilateral labor agreements needs to be improved to address comprehensive issues that is required to support the migrant workers. But at least to a certain extent, from the bilateral agreement I used to see 10 years ago, the bilateral agreement we see now is much better, for lack of better words in a sense. It covers some protection issues clearly in the bilateral agreements. So yeah, it has improved, but the challenge remains because in terms of numbers, it's huge. The migrants community is huge. For example, Ethiopian migrants in Saudi Arabia can be, I don't know, it's estimated, I think almost 500,000, if I'm not mistaken, at least by the embassy a few years back when I had a discussion with them. How many staff will the embassy have? Probably 10, 20 max. So to provide adequate support in terms of emergency situation with the migrants when they're faced with challenges and things is difficult. And of course, the authority they have in country of destination is also limited. Of course, the embassy will intervene to negotiate with the country of destination, but of course their hands are tied, not much they can do in country of destination. So the challenge remains, but it has improved because back 10 years ago, non-payment of wages was a common challenge faced by many migrant workers. Now, at least with the destination countries are also putting different policies in place for the protection of wages, we see improvement, but there's still definitely a room for improvement. So yeah, given that, of course, it's a low-skilled migrants who's not always aware of their rights as well, who's also, as you know, majority is domestic worker working in a household. So in terms of labor inspection, it doesn't exist. It's a private household. So because of all these reasons, of course, they're confronted with a number of challenges. Mostly what we hear is long working hours, lack of payment of salaries, lack of rest days. So these are some of course, confiscation of passports happens very regularly. But the country of destination in the Gulf is also making an effort in terms of at least to stop some of these things like confiscation of passport. For example, some of the countries in the Gulf have denounced this and have, employers can no longer take confiscation of passport. But sometimes, of course, there's the policy, then implementation remains a challenge.
What are you seeing on the demand side? I think especially, in Europe, Asia, obviously there's a lot of need for workers given the aging population, the deficits that have been well recorded, but also at the same time, the politics of, putting in place programs to bring in a lot of migrant workers, that's tricky. So what are you seeing?
Yeah, that's the problem. I think labor migration has become too political unnecessarily, if you ask me. Because as you know, politicians use it for campaign and things. So it is not well regarded, should I say, with them, especially country of destination. But this is definitely far from the reality. Labor migrants do contribute to the not only to the economy of country of origin, but definitely the country of destination as well. I don't know. There's a need to do a lot of awareness raising because it's also all this negative perception about migration is mostly based on just, honestly, a myth and perception that migrants are taking our jobs when the jobs are not even being filled. So there's more that needs to be done. And I don't know, it's going to take a while, but we need to move away from this using migration as one of the campaign propaganda, basically, honestly, because I think that's what has triggered or worsened the situation. Because the reality is, the migrant workers is needed. If not, they won't migrate. If there is no job, I don't think anybody will pay to go anywhere because sometimes they do pay to go to destination countries. It's because there's a demand for this labor. So if there's a demand for this labor, the country of destination have to make an effort also to have a positive policy that also integrate the migrant workers within their own countries. It will take time, I believe, but I don't think it's something that will change in the short run. But of course, a lot of awareness raising, a lot of positive image of the contribution of migration needs to be done. I think research needs to be done in terms of what the contributions of the migrants are. For example, countries like Germany with migrants, without migrants, 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the line, can they sustain the economy without labor migrants? I doubt it. So I think development partners like ourselves and others, as well as the country itself, needs to do their homework and see what the contribution is, if they can do without the migrant community. And it remains a challenge, because I remember in the past I had a chance to go to Poland with the Ethiopian government delegation, and there clearly was shortage of labor, because most of the Polish was migrating towards the Western Europe, as you know. But so they require, because even when you go to cafes, it was clear there wasn't enough workers. I mean, in a simple cafe or hotel we used to go to. So we went there, of course, to discuss the issue of bilateral cooperation between Ethiopia and Poland. But of course, one of the challenges we saw was the fact that, it's difficult to have official commitment in terms of migration of large number of migrants, even though the demand is there. So, I mean, a lot needs to be done, because it does, of course, it does affect the country of destination as well, because they do need the labor. But it's also politics that's just difficult to manage.
And maybe lastly, we can talk. Maybe you could highlight a few of the kind of main ILO initiatives in this space, the ones maybe that you think are most significant and worth highlighting.
Okay. Yeah, well, we do have quite a number of programs that we implement on labor migration in the region. We work with at continental level, we work with the African Union, as well as the Economic Commission for Africa and our sister agency, IOM, in implementing, I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but the Joint Labor Migration Program, JLMP. It looks at issues of recognition of skills within the region as well, so extension of social protection to migrant workers, and a number of capacity building of course, the free movement is also another area that we are working with. So we work at continental level as ILO, and we also work at the regional level with the different economic communities, regional economic communities, again, in improving labor migration governance. We are working in the Eastern Africa region. We have a number of projects, so one being the Better Regional Migration Management Programme, which is being supported by the UK government through the Foreign Development Corporation and the Commonwealth Development Office. We look at specific, we work in 7 countries in Eastern Africa, which is the program I manage. We look at 3 components. One focus on issues of labor migration statistics. As you know, there's scarcity of statistics in the region, generally in labor issues, but more so in migration issues. But now that I must admit, there has been improvement. Most countries, especially with the support of the ILO as well, most countries now has included the migration module. For example, Djibouti have included a migration module in their census. That was just undertaken last year. They plan to do a labor force survey as well, which have the migration module. Kenya and Uganda also within the labor force surveys looking at labor migration as one of the components they cover as well. So now there's definitely an improvement, and we're also as ILO, that's one of the area we're continuously supporting. Currently, we're trying to work with South Sudan government as well as Somalia in terms of undertaking labor force and migration survey in both countries. As you know, both countries are country of origin, but as well as destination and transit countries. So we're working with them. So we're trying to improve labor migration statistics in the region. The second component we're working on is on skills. As you know, recognition of prior learning is a major challenge faced by migrant workers. So we're trying to strengthen the capacity of institutional capacity in the region in terms of recognition of prior learning. Not only, of course, for migrants migrating abroad, but also migrants migrating within the region as well, migrants. So we're working on that. We're also working on reintegrating return migrants. So of course, with the significant number of migration, there's also a significant number of returnees coming back to their country of origin. We try to support different countries in that region in terms of integration into the labor market. So we build the capacity of the returned migrants in terms of entrepreneurship, vocational skills training when required, and also access to finance, so that they reintegrate into their country of origin labor market. We look at issues of extension of social protection for migrant workers. As you know, migrant workers tend to contribute for a different social security system, but usually they don't benefit from it because because of the time they work in destination country, they come back without claiming their benefit. So we're trying to work on that, as well as because of the different challenges being faced. For example, we're currently trying to support like countries like Kenya, and then developing the Kenya Migrant Welfare Fund, of course, which is being led by the government, but we're providing all the technical and financial support as well. The last but not least, the third component are looking at basically labor migration governance in the region. We're supporting different countries in terms of developing labor migration policies and strategies. In some countries, we're also strengthening the capacity of different stakeholders, not only government, but all relevant stakeholders. Because as you know, when we talk about government, when migration, like private recruitment agencies play critical role. Trade unions play critical role in terms of the protection for workers, and employers play critical role. So we try to strengthen the capacity of different actors working on labor migration. And of course, as you know, as ILO is a normative organization, and we do support the ratification of international labor standards, the different convention in our region. So we support different countries in terms of the process to ratify the convention, the different convention. Majority of the countries now actually have ratified the critical convention for migration. Of course, all convention applies for migrant workers, but specifically Convention 97 and Convention 143 focus on issues of migration. Countries like Somalia have ratified it recently in 2021. Of course, Kenya have ratified it. Uganda have ratified one. But there's other relevant convention on migration, such as Convention 181, which looks at private employment agencies. We're also promoting those conventions to be ratified through in the different countries that we cover. So yeah, in a nutshell, this is some of our work in the region.
Well, thanks for that, and thanks so much for all your insights, and also for flagging the December report, which I hadn't seen. So I'll take a look at that. But it's been
we can send you the link of the recent global estimate if you need to.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time. I'll reach back out to Jonas if there's anything to follow up on, but I think that should cover it.